Rolf Kurtajka with Brightwood Real Estate Education. Let's talk about a serious topic, lead-based paint. Now, I've been teaching real estate education for over 20 years now. And in that time, I've taught real estate classes, I've taught contractor classes and appraisal classes. And the lead-based paint is a big issue with contractors. And so here's a couple of stories or examples that I heard while teaching contractors classes. We have to do in our state, we have to do an hour of lead-based paint like every year or every 2 years or something like that. And when I taught those classes, it was not uncommon to have a contractor approach me on break or something and say, my kid tested positive for lead-based paint in the blood system. You know, what a disaster, especially if it could be avoided. And they would say, we don't live in an old house, we live in a new house, no lead-based paint. He doesn't go to school. I mean, there's nowhere in his environment where he would get this lead-based paint exposure. And guess where it came from? Remember, I'm teaching a contractor's class. It was determined that the lead-based paint dust came home with Dad. And so he had it on his clothes from being at the work site all day. Also, they found it present in the pickup truck. So, you know, put the story together. Child hugs Dad, poof, lead-based paint dust. Or the child's in the pickup truck, lead-based paint dust. Anyway, the child tested positive for lead-based paint. Now, there's two different issues with lead-based paint. Number one, it gets into your bloodstream. You can do that usually through inhaling or maybe ingesting if you didn't wash your hands on the job site, and then you maybe eat a sandwich. It can be undetectable in the lead, but when it really causes problems it can be detectable, in the blood. But when it really causes problems is when it starts to get into the tissues. Hospitals, they can get it out of the blood. It's not easy, but they can do transfusions and try to get it out of the blood. But once it's in the tissues, there's no way out. And that's when you start to get the symptoms of lead poisoning. And all they can do is cut those tissues out to try to alleviate the symptoms of lead poisoning. Lead will never go away. It's an element. So if it's in the soil, it stays in the soil. So let's talk about the disclosures and other things that are required. Lead can cause serious and potentially fatal neurological damage. And like I said, children and pregnant women carrying children are most at risk. So federal law requires, because of these risks, this law was passed roughly, I think, the early 1990s there, a federal law requiring sellers of residential property, sellers of homes, built prior to January 1st, 1978 to make certain disclosures. So 1978 is when the use of lead, the putting lead into paint was outlawed. But of course, that doesn't mean that there's no lead-based paint, because if you're like my dad, you got cans of paint all over the basement and they've got lead in them and they stay around forever, and he would use that to touch up. So agents must inform sellers of these obligations. There's a bunch of them here. All right, and these are things you want to know for an exam. First thing to know for the exam is sellers must make disclosures if they're selling property, homes that were built prior to 1978. That's an exam type of issue. Other ones are sellers must make disclosures and agents must inform sellers. There's an exam issue. Agents must inform sellers of the obligation to disclose. They have to disclose the location of any known lead-based paint. Well, and if they have a report that identified any lead-based paint in the property, they must provide a copy of that report. So there's two things. Disclose the location or any known location. Provide a copy of any test report you have in your possession, and provide buyers with the EPA pamphlet. So far I've got pre-1978 disclosure requirements, disclose the location, provide a copy of the report, provide a copy of the pamphlet. Here's what the pamphlet looks like. It's called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. Mostly keep the dust down and keep surfaces painted and so forth. And they must offer buyers a 10-day opportunity to have the home tested, and buyers may waive that inspection opportunity. So let's go through them again. Pre-1978, sellers must make disclosures. All right? Agents must inform sellers of that duty to disclose. The disclosures must include any known lead-based paint Any reports they have must be provided that tested for lead-based paint in the home. They also have to provide the pamphlet. They have to provide a 10-day opportunity, and buyers may waive that inspection opportunity, and they often do. And so those are all potential test questions if you're taking a real estate exam. So if not waived, if they don't waive that inspection, then the buyers may terminate the contract. So they've already signed the agreement to purchase. And then they have this contingency, if you will, where they can have the property inspected for lead, have it tested, and they can then rescind the contract based on the results of that inspection. So sellers are not required to provide an inspection if they haven't had one previously. If they've got an inspection they had done previously, they must provide that report. But at the sale, at the point of sale, there's no requirement to have sellers test for lead, nor is there a requirement for them to perform a lead abatement. The purchase contract must include acknowledgments from buyers, sellers, and agents. Now that might all occur on the lead-based paint addendum, depending how your state is operating and how the disclosure is being made. But the key thing here is agents must sign it along with all the other parties to the transaction. So think about how many signatures might be on that. All buyers, all sellers, and there might be two. They might be married or something like that. So all buyers, all sellers, and all agents involved in the transaction. Agents must sign the lead-based paint disclosure to make sure all parties are in compliance. Let's say you're working with a buyer who's buying a for sale by owner property, a FSBO we call it, for sale by owner. Even though you're representing the buyer and not the seller, you must tell the seller of the seller's disclosure requirement. So any agent involved in the transaction must inform all parties about the disclosures required and how to be in compliance. Property managers and landlords also have lead-based paint disclosures they're required to make. They're required to provide a pamphlet if the property they're renting was constructed prior to 1978. However, they do not have to provide renters with the 10-day opportunity to have the property tested and then cancel the lease agreement. So they don't have to provide that opportunity. So a quick review, key points. Properties built prior to 1978 may have lead-based paint. Sellers must make certain disclosures. Agents must make sure those disclosures get made. The disclosures include the knowledge of any location of lead-based paint, providing a copy of any lead-based paint report, providing the pamphlet, providing the 10-day opportunity, and recall that the 10-day opportunity may be waived by the buyers. So there's your wrap-up for lead-based paint.